Craig Carnelia, welcome to Cultural Attache.
Thank you.
We're here to talk primarily about Sweet Smell of Success, but for those people who don't know you well, you are a three-time Tony nominee, and you are a composer and lyricist and have worked on such musicals as Working, Is There Life After High School, Imaginary Friends, and of course, Sweet Smell of Success. Um, MasterVoices is giving three performances of Sweet Smell of Success at the Frederick P. Rose Hall in Lincoln Center on November 21st and 22nd. So I want you to go back to around 1997 because it's my understanding that you and Marvin Hamlisch were put together to write four songs to see how well you collaborated. What do you remember most about those first four songs and the process of working on them with Marvin Hamlisch?
Well, my first meeting with Marvin, we had never met, and you've done your homework. It was the summer of '97. John Guare had written a very interesting and exciting treatment of Sweet Smell of Success, and Marty Bell, who had been a fan of my work, suggested to me, uh, and Marty was at the time the second in command at a company called Live Ent. Um, and Marvin agreed to meet with me and to write four songs together, which we did over the space of probably 5 or 6 weeks. First, in my first meeting with Marvin, he said he wanted to write another serious score. Um, the first of them being Chorus Line, and the second of them being Sweet Smell of Success. And it is something we definitely both felt we achieved. Marvin was so proud of the score, as am I. And at the first meeting, he said that to me. He also said that he liked to work music first, and that's an answer to the old question of what comes first. I loved that suggestion that that's how we would work because it's basically how I work with myself when I'm a composer lyricist. Um, so I would give Marvin a line or a title, or more commonly a verse, and he would sit at the piano with a cassette tape recorder running, and he would work probably for about 45 minutes and simply play based on the material I had given him and what it caused him to feel and think. And those times with Marvin were vivid and brilliant. Just to be there while he was inventing. He was an incredibly fertile composer. Stephen Sondheim spoke of Julie Stein as being someone from whom melody just flowed. He always had another melody that he could invent in a moment. And Marvin was like that. It was uh, thrilling to be working with this composer I had always admired.
It probably was also nerve-wracking when you had to do a demonstration for Nicholas Heitner, who directed the musical, of these same four songs. And Nick Heitner wrote a story for the New York Times the week that the show opened. And he said, I was dazzled but skeptical. What memories do you have of being in that room with that demonstration and seeing whether Nick Heitner was thrilled or not with what you and Marvin were doing?
He was skeptical because the show is so dark and because it's made of such twisted relationships and even hints toward incest between a half brother and half sister. We don't know that that ever occurred, but we certainly know there's a sexual dynamic from the man to the woman, and that it guides a lot of what he does in the play. And I think Nick was nervous about that. What I remember about the meeting was simply that it was a pleasure meeting Nick. I had so enjoyed his work, especially his his work with Bob Crowley. I had just loved things I had seen. Carousel. They hadn't done Twelfth Night together yet. I had much admired Nick's work on Miss Saigon, and I'd seen a couple of plays also that he had directed, and I was very, very impressed with everything I'd ever seen. I love doing musicals with um, with directors who direct both musicals and plays, I find that it gives them a great understanding of words. And as the lyricist in my collaboration with Marvin, I truly loved how literate and how analytical Nick was when it came to language.
Marvin Hamlisch did an interview with Playbill again around the time of the show. And he said, often when you see a cagey person on the stage, you find yourself admiring the way the cagey person pulls off whatever he's doing. What did you admire about him that allowed you to write the lyrics that allowed J.J. Hunsaker to keep pulling off the things that he does?
Well, what we do as writers, this is not a new notion, is that we inhabit the characters that we write. And I, what Marvin's comment is really interesting. I hadn't heard that and I hadn't read it at the time. Um, he's certainly right. You can be impressed by the machinations and the mind of that comes up with the endless string of ways of getting what you want. Um, I my parents came from Brooklyn, and even though they found their way to the border between Queens and Nassau community or Nassau County, when by the time I was born, uh, I grew up with Brooklyn in my house, and so I felt very close to the street aspect of the two men, Sydney and JJ. It was actually quite easy to inhabit them. Um, Villains don't know they're villains. In their story, they're the hero, and as a I also teach acting to singers and have for many, many decades. And as a writer and as a teacher of acting, we just find many, many ways to inhabit the characters we write or play through imagination, through empathy, um, through creativity, through actual identification and also through a sense of play. We grew up playing games, making believe we were people who we aren't. And that's essentially what writers do, and it's what actors do.
And I read somewhere that you credited, I guess it was a credit, Marvin Hamlisch for bringing out the flashy in you. How did that manifest itself in Sweet Smell of Success? And did that flashiness find its way into other work that you've done?
Yes, it has found its way into other work. My years with Marvin have brought many things out of my work. For particularly, they made me a faster writer. I've always been very slow, and I had to work more quickly with Marvin because he's very quick. And so that's one thing I learned from Marvin. But the other thing I learned from him is since I saw him at the piano doing his actual creating, um, I saw how much his brain was not engaged and how much his whole self was engaged and how he got out of the way. It wasn't his composing wasn't the product of him working out some riddle. It was him going somewhere in himself that was freer and deeper and more animal than that. And I've emulated that in everything I've done actually since working with Marvin those years because I found it um, such a valuable lesson for an artist. Uh,
Was there freedom with that realization?
oh, absolutely, absolutely. Because I'd always led with my brain, and while I also feel that my work before Marvin was, and it was extremely emotional. I feel that my work after Marvin has just, I've been able to create things much more fluidly and much more without um, the needless strain of considering all options. Very, very often, the first thing we think of is probably a good idea.
Trust your instincts.
Absolutely. We are animals. Marvin didn't talk like that, but he wrote like that.
In that same article that Nick Heitner wrote for the New York Times, he said, "Power and showbiz have long been bedfellows, particularly in America. Out of their union, as crooked as it is, comes our new musical," which I thought, if I heard that line, I would buy a ticket immediately because that would intrigue me. But since we live in a time where power and show business have led us to this moment in ways that we could never have imagined, do you think there is more resonance to Sweet Smell of Success, whether as a musical or the film, today than maybe there ever has been?
I think it's certainly timely. And I think that it it wasn't um, timely in 2002. We had just all been through 9/11, and in fact, we were in. I think we were. I think we were just about to go into rehearsal before we left for Chicago, and the climate, at least in what was being embraced on Broadway in the musicals, was that lighter things were faring better than things that were dark. Um, but I do think it's timely. I had always loved the film. I had known it for quite a while before I was asked to do the show, and I've always loved it. What we look for as writers is people who are attempting to do things, who are trying to do things, who are desperate to make this or this or this happen. And those are great people to write. And everyone in that, every one of the principals in that show wants something so desperately that they sing.
And that gives them a reason to sing as well, which is what you need in a musical.
Absolutely.
Um, in thinking about the character of J.J. Hunsaker, and I rewatched the film over the weekend, we don't have gossip columnists, the Walter
No.
Winchell types like we did, but it's been replaced by millions of anonymous people on social media. And I just sort of feel like, you know, we haven't learned our lessons from people like Walter Winchell or a fictional character like J.J. Hunsaker. It, was there an attempt to add any sense of right or wrong into this musical so people could get an idea of what you guys were all thinking?
Well, in that same article you're talking about that Nick was interviewed in, oh, he wasn't interviewed, he just wrote it. Um, he spoke of it being a Faust tale, or he hinted at it being that. And indeed it is. And every Faust tale has in its very fiber that you're making a deal with the devil. And whether or not one believes in the devil and hell is irrelevant. You're making a deal with something that you know is could be your downfall, could kill your soul in some way. And so I think written into the fiber of the story is that. I think that what we do as writers is we we write each character without the judgment that we might have as individuals about who's doing something good to other people and who's doing something bad. It's not our job to do that. It's our job to tell the story vividly. I will say, however, that we had a really good version of the show going into Chicago, going into the out of town tryout. And a lot was lost on the way to New York. And one of the things that was lost was the end of the show. the show used to end the way the film ends, with Susan escaping. And even though our show, all versions of our show have had Susan um, removing herself from the clutches of JJ, the last moment in the show was replaced by simply by Sydney getting beat up and killed, and then JJ reporting about it in the column. Um, and John Guare and I both felt that we wanted to go back to the ending of the film. So what we're doing in this version, we're doing with Ted Sperling and and MasterVoices, is we've gone back to that. We've also restored a number of things that we felt were lost along the way that would make for a better show. And so what Ted Sperling, who is the artistic director of MasterVoices and who is conducting the show but is also directing it, is what he's allowed us to do is to have ourselves give us a chance, John and myself, and I feel like I'm also speaking for Marvin, um, to do a version of the show that we like a whole lot better than the one we opened on Broadway in March of 2002.
Well, when you opened on Broadway, there were songs like A Different World, That's How I Say Goodbye, Us and Them that were cut. Are some of these songs going to find their way into what Master Voices will be presenting?
That's How I Say Goodbye and Different World are two songs that were written for the same spot. Neither of them were in the Broadway show. The version that we're doing has the song That's How I Say Goodbye, which, by the way, Kelly O'Hara has been singing ever since we did the show in her concert work. Um, we're restoring that as well as the end of Act Two, but also we had a version of the opening number that we all preferred, and yet we improved the motor of the show with some rewriting on the opening number. So what I've done is I've made a yet another version of the opening that combines the best of each thing. So we have the sinew that was provided by the Broadway opening, but we have the what I think of as an insinuating quality that was in the original opening. So we've just done a lot of work on it. John and I have had a great time actually working on it.
How do decisions like that get made? Are they made by the director, by the whole creative team, by producers? I mean, when things go in a direction that is counter to what you all think was the best thing, what happened? How does that happen?
Pretty much Nick was leading, and don't get me wrong, I would work with Nick again in a minute. I think he's a great, great director. I think he's a really smart man. And I think at the time, Marvin and John were happy to follow that. I followed it because I was a team player. But I think we all came to feel, including I think Nick, that we maybe had done some damage.
You know, there are history of any number of shows that were not successful when they were first put on Broadway that have since become very successful. All you
Right.
have to do is look at most of Stephen Sondheim's, you know,
Right. Very true.
post Sweeney Todd work, and
Yes,
you'll find that to be the case.
absolutely. That's true.
How do you think time has treated Sweet Smell of Success?
Well, I think since 2022 didn't treat Sweet Smell of Success particularly well. I think time has treated it very well. And I always had the feeling that at the 20-year mark, we would be ripe for something happening again with the show. And here we are at 24 years. And it's just about 24 years from when we were out of town in Chicago with the show. And I think it's a great interval. And I thought what we did in Chicago back in 2001 was excellent, and it's pretty much what we'll be presenting at Master Voices.
It doesn't hurt that you have someone like Raul Esparza in the role either, because he doesn't. I mean, I love John Lithgow, but he comes with a certain kindness and warmth that we all
That's interesting.
know and embrace. And Raul, I don't think does, even though I think he's immensely talented.
That's really interesting. I don't think that there was anything deficient in John's performance. I think he was brilliant, and he won a Tony Award for it. But I do think the audience's expectation of who John is might have also been an issue because they brought in with them. Um, Certainly, a lot of people probably bought tickets to the show because they'd seen John on television, where he was charming, and it might have been hard for those audience members to make the leap, but not in any way hard for this brilliant actor to make that leap.
Well, look at he played Roberta Muldoon so brilliantly in The World According to Garp. You would
Yeah.
never think that that same actor would be a sitcom star
No,
necessarily.
no, you never would. You
There's
never
just too
would.
much talent there.
Yeah, but I agree with you about Raul. I've known Raul for decades, and I love his work. And I agree with you. I think that he comes with really no expectation that he's going to be a nice fellow. It's not that he only plays people who don't treat other people well. He does all sorts of things, but so did Lithgow. But I think that the ticket buying audience at the time were were was most um, was most recently acquainted with John through his TV work.
You know, it's interesting that you brought up the 24-year gap or so between this the start of this show and these concerts, stage concerts that Master Voices is doing. Because it took almost 25 years for people to respond to the film. It wasn't
Is
immediately a
that
success either.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it was not a success. It was not well received when it first
Wow.
opened. It took time. I think there's something about, you know, bitter, vindictive characters on a certain level that you either accept them at face value or it takes time for people to get there. And
Right,
maybe
right,
that's
right.
the case with this story, regardless of how it's presented.
You know, one of my favorite films is Glengarry Glen Ross. It's 2 hours of people treating each other so badly, including the very nature of the business these people are involved in, where they're hoodwinking people out of their life savings, selling them uh, less than attractive real estate. Um, I think there's a case where we are fascinated by the things they do and how well they do them, and frankly, by Mamet's brilliant language. And here, John Guare and I, were using this great work of Ernest Lehman and Clifford Odets. I mean, two great writers who created just a language that these press agents used, and even the other people in the film. It's such a unique and dirty world they've created. And Guerra and I just had such a blast living in it, and being both clever and dark. We both responded to that and that game, the game of saying things really, really well, but with a vernacular and a swagger and a syntax that was of the street in 1952.
All set to jazz music.
To wonderful jazz music.
One thing you do that's also wonderful is I've read some of the conversations that you've had with other creators in musical theater. And one I particularly enjoyed was the conversation you had with Sheldon Harnick.
Oh yes,
Uh,
it was
and
a
you discussed the musical Tenderloin, which both of you really love.
yeah,
And Sheldon Harnick said to you, "I think it's a wonderful score too. I wish that the book was better for that show."
right.
And you asked, "What was it? Was it the story, the way the story was told? What was wrong?" If Sheldon were to ask you those same questions, given how Sweet Smell of Success originally ran, how would you answer him?
That's a Beautiful piece of homework you did on that. Just quite clever. So Sheldon's talking to me and he's saying, "So what was it? What kept it from being successful?" I would say people loving the film and expecting the show to maybe be um, a straight up musical version of the film, which it isn't. The novella on which it's based, also written by Ernest Lehman, um, is very different from the film. And Guare took his cue from that and provided a good deal of backstory before what is essentially the plot of the film begins, and then the plot of the film. I think that may have irked some people. It's possible it would have irked me as an audience because I was so in love with the film. The other thing I would say is I would think timing. I think I think it was bad timing. Um, we couldn't have known that. Of course, none of us could have known what what we'd all be feeling collectively and individually after 9/11. The musicals that were successful that season, all of them deservedly so, but the ones that were successful were Mamma Mia, Thoroughly Modern Millie, and Urinetown. Every one of them in different ways, light. And I'm not suggesting that some other dark musical mightn't have found favor that season, but I do think that that darkness was not welcome after we had all been through being attacked like that, and the collective outrage, grief, and then oddly national camaraderie that felt so good. Nothing in my lifetime um, has ever felt like that. There was a myth of that when I was growing up in the 50s and 60s before Vietnam and Kennedy was assassinated. But this was real and it was a good feeling. And there were still differences between the political parties and between people, but that was a national experience that I think made us kinder for a while.
I wish we still had that.
I do too. I do too.
One last question for you, Craig. Um, let's go way back in time to when you were a teenager, and you and your brother Jimmy are writing a musical called The Weekend.
How did you unearth that, for God's sake?
I do my work.
Oh my God.
I do my work. If that young teenager was able to jump forward in time and see that a musical that you wrote is being represented in 2025 and everything that's happened between that time, what do you think he'd have to say?
Good for you, Craig, I think is what he'd have to say. I think he would be thrilled that I've gotten to Broadway 4 times and that I have been true to my own artistic ambition and integrity for a lifetime as both a teacher and a writer. I think he'd be very, very pleased. The Weekend was raw sewage. It was so terrible, written by amateurs. And my brother has made me promise decades ago that I would destroy my one remaining copy, which I did. He wrote the book. He's a clinical psychologist and a brilliant one.
Well, then the flip side of that question that I have to ask you is if you could go back in time and give that young man advice about what's the best way to live the life that he wants, what would you say, having presumably lived a lot of the life you wanted to live?
That's well put. I would say I have lived a lot of the life that I wanted. The thing I would say to him is you can do a lot of different things at once. You can be an actor and also be a writer, because I was, but I stopped acting to commit to writing. And I'd tell him work on a number of things at once. Don't ever be caught for a year, 2, 3 years putting eggs in one basket. The basket's big enough to hold a bunch of eggs.